Let's ask the Lord to bless our time this morning. Our Father and our God, we do thank you that the Scriptures are clear that there is a heaven to gain and a hell to shun. That we do not need to wander around in confusion and darkness concerning what happens after death. But your Word reveals to us with clarity the reality of a conscious afterlife, either in bliss in your presence or in conscious torment in Hades. We ask that you will now give us the assistance of the Holy Spirit as we seek to understand those who believe in alternate views concerning life after death, and help us to be prepared to give an answer to those who question us because of our hope of heaven. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. We are living in a day and age in which recycling has reached epidemic proportions. Even in the county in which I live in Pennsylvania, there are rumblings that eventually we're going to have one garbage bin that will be for paper, and another one for glass, and another one for metal, and another one for this, and another one for that. Pretty soon it looked like the supermarket has come in front of every home. Well, recycling is something also that is a topic in the spiritual realm. There are those who believe that the human soul is recycled much like you recycle aluminum cans. That is, you keep coming back again and again and again. Instead of there being a conscious afterlife in heaven, in the presence of God and of all the holy angels, instead of there being any conscious punishment in hell, the torment of the damned, instead we are told by many Hollywood figures, some of the celebrities that we all wish to enjoy in terms of their movies and their acting abilities, that really reincarnation is the way that we should think about life after death. And if you go to the local supermarket and you pick up one of the many tabloids, you will read some exciting stories how that this person proves that reincarnation is true. And one week they tell us that Elvis is alive, and the next week they tell us that he has been reincarnated in a 3-year-old child somewhere living in Tennessee. But all of you have seen and heard much of the media propaganda concerning the subject of reincarnation. Some of you may have watched the special with Shirley MacLaine. I'll never forget that particular episode when she stood there on the beach with her guru, and she put her hands out and she said, "I am God." Of course, as I sat there, I was the cheering section, and since she was facing the ocean, I said, "Walk on, Shirley, walk on. Prove to us your divinity and do some water treading like the Son of God." Well, because of all the propaganda, be it the Sunday morning cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons, comic books, the material that's often given in the public schools, surveys indicate that up to 60% of Americans now believe that reincarnation is indeed possible. That instead of there being a heaven and a hell in the Christian traditional sense, we must now consider the possibility that when we leave here, we're coming back. Now, how we come back, of course, is the great topic and the great controversy. Thus, the theory of reincarnation is perhaps at this time the leading competitor to the biblical concept of life after death. Now, in order to understand this, and remember, if you're going to refute something from a biblical standpoint, you need to understand something before you can refute it. We need to understand just what reincarnation is all about. The first thing that we must grasp is that when we're talking about reincarnation, we're not talking about a new theory, something that's just been developed down at MIT or Caltech, but we're talking about a very ancient religious concept that is connected with such systems as Hinduism and Buddhism. In Eastern circles, the Orthodox Hindu idea of reincarnation teaches that when you die, your soul or spirit, that part of you which is non-material, is reborn into another body here upon earth. Now, an Orthodox Hindu is not too concerned about what kind of body into which you get recycled. You could be recycled into the body of a man or a woman that is a baby who is being born. Or you can even be recycled into the body of an animal, the body of an insect, a fowl, a fish, even as something as lowly perhaps as a carrot or a rock or a tree stump, or as one writer put it, into shrubbery. Now, in the 60s and 70s, you did not hear Western reincarnationists speaking of being recycled or reincarnated, and don't be thrown by that word. The word carne in Spanish and Latin simply means flesh. Reinfleshed, recycled back into body. You did not hear people talking about returning as someone's pet or animal companion, to be politically correct, until you come to the 80s, particularly under the influence of the Dalai Lama. For example, in Joe Fisher's book, The Case for Reincarnation, with the introduction by the Dalai Lama, the head of the Tibetan form of Buddhism, we find a full-scale defense of the idea that you may well come back to this world, not in human form, but in some other kind of body or existence that Western people might consider perhaps a lower scale of being. His illustrations to prove this, for example, in Sri Lanka, when they were doing some archaeological diggings, the local villagers were alarmed when they found that the archaeologists wanted to get rid of the hornets or the wasps that were infesting a local dig. The villagers rose up in protest because they believed that these wasps were actually the reincarnated souls of ancient warriors who once defended that fort. He refers to another island in the Micro-Asian island of Jap where people believe that their relatives can come back as cockroaches. Now, I have an uncle that I could possibly think could come back as a cockroach if he isn't one now. You also have in India those who wear masks and have a broom so that they can sweep aside insects. They do not believe in killing the pests that eat up the harvest. As one scholar pointed out quite accurately, India would have more than enough food to export, except they do not believe in killing the rats and killing the insects and the other creatures that eat up the harvest. This, he states, is founded upon the Hindu and Buddhist concept of the Laws of Manu, M-A-N-U. This law states that if you do something evil in this life, you may well be reincarnated in the next life in an appropriate form as a way of punishment. For example, those who steal grain would become a rat in the next life. Those who would steal honey become bees. Those who steal milk, they will become cows and crows and other things. Those who steal meat become vultures, and a woman who is disloyal to her husband would be born in the womb of a jackal. And the list of crimes goes on to the fact that those who would violate the guru's bed would return as grass, as shrub, or as creepy crawly vines. But you see, we are dealing today with those who honestly believe that one can be reincarnated, and this reincarnation does not necessarily entail being recycled into human form. Instead, we find that this view of Orthodox Hinduism is beginning to have popularity. Now, Edgar Cayce originally was the one who westernized the concept of reincarnation. Back in the 60s, as I lived in New York City during that period, moving there from Orlando, doing a lot of activity in Greenwich Village, I met a lot with the disciples of Edgar Cayce, also with the followers of Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, and I discovered a westernized concept of reincarnation in which they took the Christian idea of progress and the Western humanistic idea of evolution, which is a heresy off of the Christian concept, and combined it with reincarnation to mean that once you began as a swirling molecule, then you evolved upward and onward till you finally became a rock, and then as you were very good rock, maybe a pet rock, and you didn't do anything wrong, then you evolved to the stage of being a carrot. And then from the carrot, since you were a good carrot, you were able to become a rabbit. And then from a rabbit, perhaps to a dog. And from a dog, finally, you arrived at the human level. And once, as these westernized reincarnationists put it, once you have arrived at the pinnacle of human evolution, you will never regress, so you never have to worry about becoming a cow, a clam, or la cucaracha casa. This westernized form, which is definitely in variance and contradiction of the historic meaning of transmigration or reincarnation, is now losing its grips as New Agers are much more bold. In the book by Joe Fisher, he points out that there are those who are committing suicide. He himself brings up the case of a 15-year-old boy who believed that he could select the body into which he would be recycled to death, and he wanted to become a rabbit, so he committed suicide, and he left the note, "I want to become a rabbit after I die." Indeed, one of the things that must be pointed out is that in this scourge of teenage suicides which we see around the country, so often they leave a note stating they blew this life and they figured the next time around they would do better. And you see that reincarnation and suicide has always gone hand in hand. That's why in Eastern religions and Eastern cultures, suicide is not something negative, it's something honorable. Be it the harikari of the Japanese, or be it the wife in sati who throws herself upon the burning pyre of her husband, which is self-burning, self-molestation in terms of suicide. And you now have cases in Western cultures in which people are killing themselves. As a matter of fact, it's interesting to point out that when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a member of the Society for Psychical Research and one of the devotees of occult, as well as being the author of the Sherlock Holmes series, gave a series of lectures at Carnegie Hall in which he sought to demonstrate reincarnation, there was a rash of suicides after his lectures, people leaving notes behind saying, "Now that I have hope that I can come back and try it over again, I'm not waiting, I'm leaving now." Well, you see, what we need to tell our teens is not the idea, "He doesn't love me. I wish I could die. And if I die, I'll come back and try again." You're not going to come back and try it again. You're not going to come back as a rabbit, or as a cockroach, or as a rat, or as a happy tree shrub outside of someone's house. There is life after death, according to the Scriptures, but this is not to be recycled here upon earth. Now, how does reincarnation function? It functions by the law of karma. You say, well, what in the world is karma? Karma is simply the non-personal principle that you get in the next life what you deserve on the basis of what you did in this life. So in this life, you are now suffering for the evils that you did in a previous life. Now, instead of having a personal deity, that is, God, who would, as the judge of all mankind, would tell you what your judgment, you have this non-personal principle. It's not a deity. This principle simply states that you are now experiencing what you sowed in a past life. For example, you can have good karma. Let's say you're born into an affluent white family in suburbia. Your father is quite wealthy. Your mom is high in society. You have your swimming pool in the backyard, and you go to the best high school. And you see all the affluence and all the wealth, and you go to the best schools, and you end up going to Vassar. Well, you see, that's your good karma. You deserve that wealth and health and beauty. You deserve the fact that your teeth are capped and that your parents had enough money to see to it that you're a knockout. That's your right. You deserve that. You shouldn't feel guilty about being rich and affluent and popular and a cheerleader. But what about, let's say, if you were born in Harlem as a poor little crack baby? That poor baby crying of an unwed mother, of an addict. Well, you see, don't pity that baby. You see, that person must have done some very evil things in the past life. And they're getting punished right now for what they did. And they owe to karma the suffering they are going through. So if you're born with some problem, either mental, such as retardation, if you have a physical handicap, or physically impaired, as the political correct thinkers would tell us, if you're born in poverty, if you're too fat, too thin, too tall, too short, too whatever it is, don't think you got shortchanged, honey. You're getting what you deserve. I'll never forget on the Oprah show, she had a number of New Agers on there who were explaining, like Linda Evans and Shirley MacLaine. And as Oprah listened, she cocked her head to one side and said, "What about the handicapped?" Well, the answer came back. Well, they're handicapped because they think that way and because that's their karma. In other words, as I have pointed out in plenty of debates with various gurus, have you ever spent one dime to alleviate human suffering? Where are the nursing homes of the mind cults and of the occultists? Where are the centers that deal with the handicapped and meals on? Show them to me. As Rajani said, the Christians take care of the poor. I'll take care of the rich. Well, you see, once you understand karma, then you understand why you don't need to have compassion and concern. This is how the caste system then comes into being. Whatever you're born in is what you deserve. If your father was a taxi driver, then you should be a taxi driver. That's your fate. And this is why there's no compassion. There's no caring. And as you walk the streets of the black hole of Calcutta, you will find the homeless. And let me tell you, there are no rock stars in India raising money for the homeless. You can find those dying. And why are they dying? They are getting what they deserve. Missionaries tell us that when the Christians first arrived in Japan, on one occasion, they saw an individual drowning in a pond, a child. And the people were standing around the pond watching this child drown. The missionary jumped in and saved the child, and he almost got killed by the mob, who then explained, because they were applauding as the child was drowning, that you interfered with this child's karma. He was no doubt a thief or a murderer, and he was getting his just deserts, and because you've interfered, he'll now have to be reincarnated in order to get his full quotient of suffering. And they almost lynched him for it. Well, what are the arguments for reincarnation? And again, I must point out that in philosophy as well as in theology, there are only so many arguments you can really give on any particular subject. That is, as you examine the various books, as I have, concerning reincarnation and transmigration, there are really only 4 arguments when you come down to it. There may be 1,000 variations of it, but there's only a few basic arguments that they give over and over and over again, and which I call argumentum ad nauseam ad infinitum. For example, the first argument that is always given by reincarnationists is that, well, reincarnation explains the problem of evil and of suffering. Some people are born in pain. How do you explain arthritis and poverty and someone born blind and someone born with physical ailments, mental ailments, or someone who has an accident and loses an arm or a leg? Well, reincarnation explains the problem of pain and suffering and evil in this life. People are getting their dues. Karma has caught up with them. So you had a car accident. Well, you must have done something bad in the past life, and you're getting punished for it now. Or if you're one of those people, and I have a friend like that, he's never had a single instance of tooth decay. As a physical specimen, as he walks by, all the single ladies go, because he's a number 10. He's not only good looking, not only his teeth are perfect, but he's intelligent to boot. You say, life isn't fair. Well, you see, he's getting his karma too. He must have done some good things. So reincarnation explains and solves the problem of evil. There are 2 errors, logically speaking, that are revealed in this argument. Number 1, if you say, well, you're suffering now for the sins and the evils you did in a previous life, right? Yes. Did you suffer in that life? Yes. Well, where did that suffering come from? Well, there was a life before that life. Well, in the life before that life, was there suffering? Yes. Well, you did an evil in the life before that life, So you begin to go back and back and back down a chain. Each link is a different life. Now, you've run across a problem here. Was there a first life? You know, where you graduated, you were no longer a dog, you were no longer a rabbit, and you graduated to be a human being. How come you suffered in that life? Well, you either end up with a first human life in which there was suffering and pain and death and misery. Of course, you can't have reincarnation unless somebody dies. But there's no previous human life to explain the evil that you're suffering in that life. And even if you try to push it down and say, you were a very bad rabbit, very naughty rabbit, if you keep pushing it till finally you're down at the point where you're a rock in some stream, you can't talk about being a bad or a good rock today. You end up with a first life for which there is no previous karma to explain the evil and suffering in that life. Or secondly, you try to escape that by saying it's an eternal chain and you are eternally rotating on the spit of the fires of karma. Well, that merely makes the problem of evil eternal. That doesn't solve a problem if you proclaim it eternal. You've simply extended the problem back into the mysteries of time. Reincarnation does not solve the problem of evil. It compounds the problem of evil by teaching people they do not have to be compassionate, by doing nothing to alleviate the human suffering that is all around. Secondly, they not only argue in terms of that it solves the problem of evil, but they talk about reincarnational recall. Now, what is recall? Simply has to do with memories. You know how we sing that, memories, you know. This is what they're talking about. First has to do with what the French call Deja Vu. You ever had that? You walk in some place and you say, boy, I feel I've been here before. Well, a reincarnation says, well, you see, when you feel that, it's because you were there before. And when you meet someone and you say, boy, I think I know you. Do I know you? And they look at you and say, hey, what's your sign? Oh, yeah. You're trying to pick. No, I'm talking. Let's get out of the bar scene. But you've got people that you think maybe you know, or places. And this is called deja vu. It's that sort of feeling that perhaps you've known or been or somehow experienced this before. The only trouble with this is that you can have this with the house that was constructed last year. It was very hard in a previous life to be in a house that just got built. Or people that are younger or older than you, particularly the older ones. The feeling of deja vu, as we know it, simply does not cut any logic in terms of giving us anything clearly to state concerning reincarnation. It proves nothing. Secondly, they not only have deja vu, they also have what is called spontaneous recall. And they particularly love to talk about the stories of children and some child who wakes up one morning and says, I lived in Alabama, and I was a general in the Civil War, and I killed me some Yankees. And this supposedly proves reincarnation because it's a spontaneous recall of a previous life. The only problem with spontaneous recall is that, one, you often have multitudes of people all claiming to be the same reincarnation. So we have dozens of people all saying they're Jesus, or Moses, or Plato, or Socrates, or Napoleon, or Nostradamus. Now logically, either they're all crazy, they're all liars, or one of them's telling the truth, but they can't all be Jesus. There aren't multiple souls that need to be reincarnated on a mass type of conveyor belt. And spontaneous recalls are notoriously inaccurate because they never happen under scientific details, and for this reason they're excused from any area of evidence. Hypnotic recall is when someone puts you under hypnosis, and that leads you supposedly to say that under hypnosis that you were indeed reincarnated. Any of you remember the search for Bridie Murphy, a housewife in 1950s, while under hypnosis from an amateur therapist, she began to speak in Irish brogue and Gaelic and talked about old Ireland. She talked about the church she attended, St. Teresa's. She talked about the house she lived in, the Meadows. And she said her name was Bridie Murphy. She was born around 1794. She lived most of her life in the 1800s in County Cork, Ireland. And the world was shocked. A book was published immediately, The Search for Bridie Murphy. And they put it into a movie immediately. And nobody ever bothered to check up till now. As I point out in the book Death and the Afterlife, then also in Reincarnation and Christianity, the search was made for this Bridie Murphy. What did we find? Number one, according to the parish records, there is no reference whatsoever to a Bridie Murphy being born in that part of Ireland, period. There's no documentation whatsoever. And given the Catholicism of the area and the fact that everyone was registered in the town parish, the fact that she isn't listed anywhere, particularly in the time period, it does not bode well. Secondly, the church that she said she attended in the early 1800s was not built till 1911. Now that would take a miracle to attend that church before it was constructed. The house that she said she lived in supposedly was made of wood, while all the homes in that area were made of stone, and there is no record of a wooden house by the name of the Meadows. It simply did not exist. Well, after we saw that in Ireland there's absolutely no evidence that any Bridie Murphy ever walked the turf and spoke in Gaelic, we decided to check into Mrs. Simmons' background. Well, we found that Ruthie lived with her Irish immigrant grandparents until the age of 3, where her grandmother would speak in the Irish brogue. And of course she'd talk about old Ireland. So here's a little child listening to the old Irish and the stories of old Ireland. And guess what church her grandmother attended? St. Teresa's, the one that was built in 1911. Well, that explains it. Under hypnosis, these memories of the Gaelic and the Irish phrases and the stories of old Ireland were revived, but reinterpreted to mean that she had a previous life. But where did the name Bridie Murphy come from? No one could seem to discover that till some shrewd person says, check the tax rolls. Guess who lived next door to the grandparents? The Murphys. And guess who came over to do their gossiping together, but good old Bridie Murphy gossiping with the grandmother of Ruth Simmons. Now we know the whole story. We have done the search for Bridie Murphy, and we discovered her not in Ireland in the 19th century, but in a walk-up tenement discussing with her friend, an immigrant from Ireland.